نعين الزمن سيفنا والقلم.
They said to me that Ambassador Issa has proven to be a very good representative for his country. He's direct, he's informative, and a person of his word. You can't get a better compliment from the United States.
Distinguished diplomats, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you all wherever you are around the world to this special episode of Unheard Stories. I am Lubna Hassaniya, joining you from Southern California. It is with great pleasure and honor that I present to you my guests today, His Excellency Gabriel Issa, former ambassador of Lebanon to the United States, and Dr. Saleh Nsouli, former director at the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, both of whom have been lauded by those who worked with them for their integrity and exceptional leadership. Welcome, everyone. Ambassador Issa was born and raised in Lebanon. At the age of 18, he immigrated to the US, where he earned his degree in civil engineering from the Detroit Institute of Technology. He established multiple businesses in the automotive publishing industry, real estate development, and internet auction platforms. Ambassador Issa worked tirelessly to promote the interests of the Lebanese community in the US. He forged relationships with members of the US Congress and government officials to advocate Lebanon's independence and sovereignty. He was instrumental in the passing of the Syria Accountability and Lebanese Sovereignty Restoration Act in 2003. He negotiated the peaceful withdrawal of Syrian troops from Lebanon in 2005. Ambassador Issa presented his letters of credence to President Trump in January of 2018. As to Dr. Saleh Nsouli, he was born in New York. The fact that his father, Munir Hensuli, was a Lebanese ambassador who served Lebanon for years led Dr. Nsouli to live in different countries growing up. Dr. Nsouli holds a BA in economics from the AUB and a PhD in economics from Vanderbilt University. He has held numerous senior positions at the IMF for nearly 40 years. He served as the director of the IMF's offices in Europe. He also held high-level positions in the IMF's Institute, the Policy Development and Review Department, the Middle East and Central Asia Department, the African Department, as well as the Research Department. Dr. Nsouli taught economics at Vanderbilt University, lectured widely across the world, and published multiple books and articles. Ever since 2013, Dr. Nsouli has raised warning signs about the unsustainable economic and financial policies pursued in Lebanon and has provided a set of clear corrective measures to help the country recover. With their different professional backgrounds, my guests will meet us today at the intersection of politics and economics with three objectives in mind. One, to identify the root causes of the current economic and political crisis paralyzing Lebanon. Two, to lay out the roadmap to recovery with the critical comprehensive reform measures suggested by my guests. And finally, to encourage the dialogue so we can respect and appreciate each other, because only together we can rebuild our society and our country. Let's get started. Good evening, Ambassador Issa. You're joining us from Maad in the Jbeil region. How are you doing, Ambassador?
Yes, and thank you for hosting Dr. Hensuli and myself, and hopefully we'll have some insights on what's going on in Lebanon.
Yes, that's our objective. Welcome, welcome, Ambassador. And also, I want to welcome Dr. Hensuli. You're joining us from Washington, D.C. Good afternoon to you.
Thank you, Dr. Lubna. I wanted to say thank you for organizing this event at a critical time for Lebanon. And I also want to say that your program, Unheard Stories, has been an inspiration for all of us. You have showcased the capabilities of the Lebanese abroad and showed what they can achieve in other countries and what they could have achieved had they stayed in their countries as well. And you have managed to do that, although you have a very busy schedule. You are a scientist. You have done pioneering research on cancer. You are an author. You have written a widely acclaimed book. Actually, I was looking at it again. Where Will My Heart Beat? Which many of my friends have bought and thanked me for recommending it to them. So we want to thank you. It's also a pleasure to be with my friend, Ambassador Issa. I am delighted that Awnil Kaki has joined us. He has been my friend since the prime days of our youth, and I've always sought his advice. And I want to thank all the distinguished participants today. Their attendance is a testimony of concern about the situation in Lebanon. So thank you very much, Dr. Lubna.
Yes, you're welcome. You're welcome, Dr. Hensuli. I've been separated from Lebanon far too long. It's disheartening to see it still suffering at the same hands, and I feel compelled to do everything I can to help. Dr. Hensuli and Ambassador Issa, the two of you have been collaborating diligently since the start of the crisis in 2019 to help encourage Lebanon to undertake the necessary reforms to address the economic and financial crisis. And that's frankly why I thought of having both of you here today. I will start with you, Dr. Hensuli. Can you explain to our audience how this collaboration between you and Ambassador Issa was established and what you based it on?
Thank you, Dr. Lubna. I met Ambassador Issa actually for the first time when he came to Washington in 2018 as Lebanon's new ambassador. Even in my first meeting with him, I was very impressed. He reached out to all the Lebanese and became a uniting force for the Lebanese in the United States. In discussions with him, I found him to be devoted to Lebanon, independent, frank, direct, friendly, humble, and having great judgment. He earned the respect of the Lebanese community, Congress, and the government authorities in the United States. A most effective ambassador serving Lebanon's interests. In late 2019, he approached me to discuss his concern about a potential economic crisis in Lebanon, something that I had already been warning the Lebanese authorities about ever since 2013. So together with him, I prepared a list of 7 critical measures that would prevent the crisis. And today I actually looked up the 7 measures. I will just mention 3 of them. One was restoring a unified floating exchange rate, undertake audits of the central bank, commercial banks, and government budget accounts, And 3, assure depositors that their deposits will be fully safeguarded with no limits on withdrawals. Ambassador Issa communicated these 7 points to President Aoun, who was very supportive. We were then in touch in early 2020 with the new Prime Minister, Hassan Diab, as the executive of the country, with whom we shared the 7 points immediate measures plan. We felt if they were taken, they would have avoided the crisis. I warned Prime Minister Diab about the urgency in acting, as the exchange rate was rising rapidly and had already reached 1,800 Lebanese pounds to the dollar. Unfortunately, he did nothing to implement corrective measures, but instead took counterproductive measures that aggravated the crisis. The current government, which took over in late 2021, has unfortunately followed the same path, even though the cabinet has some very competent and knowledgeable economists who had worked in the IMF and the World Bank. And today I was reading the speech of the Prime Minister at the Arab Summit. His statement was a missed opportunity. These countries, the Gulf countries, the United States, France, the European Union, and many other countries have been calling on Lebanon to start reforms. And this statement was a missed opportunity in the sense that there was not a single mention of reforms. He underscored the suffering of the Lebanese people. He asked for assistance, but there was not a single mention of reforms.
Yes, very unfortunate, Dr. Nsouli. Ambassador Issa, I would like to bring you in on the same question, please, about your collaborative efforts with Dr. Nsouli.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Nsouli, for all the kind words about assessing me. If I were to do the same, I would, about you, it would take a lot longer time than you took. So and probably Dr. Lubna will have to cut me off. And you had exhibited all the qualities of a statesman, a true statesman. And on the personal level, all those who know you admire in you your kindness, your eagerness to help everyone, and also most than anything else, your unwavering love for your motherland, Lebanon. I first met Dr. Nsouli at the home of our dear friends from IMF, Maya Shweiri and Eddie Gemail, when they hosted a dinner for a Lebanese delegation visiting the World Bank. And needless to say, I was very impressed with his knowledge and experience. We started meeting after that regularly, but when the crisis started in Lebanon, I reached out to him and I asked him to help put together a plan, an urgent plan of urgent measures that are needed to avoid or at least to stop the crisis. And he did so, and as he mentioned, I communicated the plan to our government officials. And since then, we've been talking and communicating and meeting almost on a daily basis. And we are intent on to keep trying to urge our officials to take these measures. I don't know if we have succeeded. Maybe we didn't, but we intend to keep trying, and hopefully we'll succeed one day.
Yes, yes. The key point here, Ambassador, is to keep trying. And it's evident that the relationship between the two of you is built on mutual respect and trust in each other's remarkable breadth of knowledge and professionalism. Back to you, Dr. Nsouli. In June of last year, you went to Lebanon as a candidate for Prime Minister. How did that happen?
Thank you, Dr. Lubna. Let me start off by giving you a little bit of background. As you mentioned, my father was a Lebanese ambassador abroad, and I spent all my years growing up within Lebanese embassies. And one thing my father emphasized very much was the same kind of spirit that I found in Ambassador Issa, that we are all Lebanese. I never heard from him anything about political divisions. And over the years, I stayed away from the politics of Lebanon and any involvement, although I had a lot of friends who had very high positions in the Lebanese political structure.
Yes.
When I went to AUB, I was shocked to find that within the student body was full of the same political divisions that exist in the Lebanese society. So I found this unacceptable and something that Lebanon would suffer from eventually. So together with my friends, we formed the Independent Student Society. And I think two of my dearest friends who worked with me at the time on the Independent Student Society, Edgar Fram and Bassam Hawass, are with us today. The basic principle was that we are all Lebanese and not divided factions. We are all one country. We are all should have our loyalty to our country. Now, in 2022, to answer now directly your question, and I think this background is important to see where I am coming from. Several parliamentarian friends, including some of my previous classmates at the AUB, many family members and friends urged me to go to Lebanon, including Ambassador Issa, who was the most insistent, in view of the growing economic crisis, and arguing that given my long experience dealing with crisis countries, I could help Lebanon. As Ambassador Issa well knows, I was extremely reluctant. But one day my wife, who is German, saw a documentary on the plight of cancer patients who were at risk because their treatments were interrupted due to shortages of medications. And I remember she looked at me, she said, "You have been helping so many countries over so many years. Why aren't you helping your country?" And that helped seal my decision to go to Lebanon in mid-2022. Upon my arrival and my first stay in Lebanon for only 5 days, I met with the president, the head of the parliament, the Sunni Mufti Daryan, and virtually all parliamentarian groups, explaining the risks of inaction and detailing my reform plan to put Lebanon on the path to recovery, and what was of utmost concern to many Lebanese, to save the deposits in the banking system. I underscored my conditions for forming a cabinet. Aouni El-Kaki, my good friend who's with us today, conducted the first interview with me and published it in a chart. And in that interview, I detailed my conditions for accepting the premiership. Now, these conditions included the formation of an independent, non-political cabinet of competencies, focused on implementing economic reforms to salvage the country from the growing crisis, assurances of no political interference to obstruct the reforms, and a commitment on my part to leave after 6 months after turning around the downward trajectory of the economy. I was gratified that this was supported by the president, by many parliamentarians, and by the formal endorsement of the Lebanese Economic Association. And I think we have the president of the Lebanese Economic Association with us, Dr. Munir Rashid, and Hensuli and Associated Beiruti Families Association. And I think we also have with us today Saleh Nsouli, who is the president of that association. At the end of the 5 days, I returned to Washington, only to come under intense pressure from those supporting me to go back before the formal presidential consultations. I returned, but only for 3 days, and quickly realized that the severe political infighting would hinder the necessary reforms. I therefore thanked all those who had committed to formally nominate me in the presidential consultations, asked them not to put my name forward, and returned to Washington.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Nsouli. It's very unsettling what the chaos and the divisions on the political scene have cost the country so far. Dr. Nsouli, in your recent address at the Institute of International Finance, the IIF, you focused on the financial and economic situation in Lebanon. You titled it, Lebanon, the Sinking Titanic, Without the Music and the Waiting Game. Why did you characterize Lebanon as the sinking Titanic, Dr. Nsouli?
Actually, Dr. Lubna, this title came from the former French Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jean-Yves Le Drian, who visited Lebanon. And at the end of his visit, after he had talked to all the country authorities, had a press conference where he said, Lebanon is like the sinking Titanic without the music. And I found that that is the best characterization of the current situation. Today, Lebanon is facing a catastrophic multitude of crises, not one crisis, that puts the country on an analogous path to disaster, like that followed by the Titanic, including one of the worst economic and financial crises in modern history. In my almost 40 years in the IMF, I had never seen a country confronting so many different crises. It is one of the worst possible crises that one can think of. First, we have a governmental vacuum. We have no president, and we have only a caretaker government. Second, we have a political crisis. The Lebanese are fragmented and divided, and this is leading to policy paralysis. Third, we have a governance crisis. Corruption is widespread. There is judicial system interference. There are arrest warrants for the central bank governor from France, Germany, and the Interpol. And Lebanon is likely to be grey-listed for money laundering and financing of terrorism.
Yeah.
Fourth, we have a crisis of public institutions. The public institutions are barely functioning. There is very poor attendance. Even embassies abroad are suffering, affecting Lebanon's image in the world. Fifth, we have a crisis of transparency. We don't know what's happening with the BDL accounts. We don't know what's happening at the level of the budget. We don't know what's happening in public institutions. We don't know what's happening in government enterprises. Sixth, we have a financial crisis, the one that everybody seems to be focused on now. We have had a currency collapse, a government debt default, foreign exchange losses, massive ones, banking sector illiquidity, multiple exchange rates, and ad hoc capital controls. Seventh, we have an economic crisis. There have been drastic falls in real GDP, real incomes, and employment. Eighth, we have an infrastructure crisis. There is almost no electricity supply. The water supply is spotty. Road maintenance is almost non-existent. And the port operations are suffering, particularly after the Beirut port explosion.
Yes.
Nine, we have a refugee crisis that has become central in recent weeks. And the Syrian refugees today amount to about 1/2 of the Lebanese population. 10th, we have a humanitarian crisis. And to describe it, I will quote Dr. Oliver De Schutter, of the United Nations. He said, in just 2 years, multidimensional poverty in Lebanon has doubled from 42% to 82%, with nearly 4 million people facing deprivation in education, healthcare, public utilities, housing, assets, or employment and income. 11th, we have a confidence crisis. The confidence of Lebanon has been totally eroded. Donors, international institutions, economic agents have lost the trust in Lebanon.
Yes.
This, in my view, is the perfect storm. And this is what Lebanon is confronting today.
Yes, we've been confronting them catastrophically for so many years. But what was it that triggered the recent economic and financial crisis, Dr. Nsouli?
If I was to select two elements, it would be the result of economic and financial mismanagement and widespread corruption.
Yeah.
The budget was facing rising imbalances. There was a rapid increase in government debt to one of the highest ratios to GDP in the world. Lebanon fixed its exchange rate at an overvalued rate and implemented a policy of high interest rates to attract foreign exchange. Now, there was a concentration of commercial banks' foreign exchange assets in the central bank and in government bills. In other words, the commercial banks were attracting foreign deposits at very high interest rates and putting all this money, or almost all of it, in the central bank, which was paying them even higher interest rates, and in government bills. Now, one thing nobody talks about in Lebanon is the chronic quasi-fiscal losses of the central bank. The difference between the interest rates that the central bank was paying the banks on their foreign exchange deposits and the interest that it could earn on such foreign exchange. This was also the result of poor prudential practices for profits by the commercial banks and poor central bank supervision and oversight. Now, the losses of public enterprises, including notably the electricity company, aggravated the government deficit and its debt. So this is the background of the crisis as it was evolving. What was the trigger for the crisis? It was the loss of confidence, the fall in foreign exchange inflows that started depleting foreign exchange reserves in the central bank and in commercial banks. This was really the unraveling of what has become known as the financial engineering, which was basically a Ponzi scheme on a national level. And we have to be clear today. There is a shared responsibility between the government, the central bank, the Bank Supervision Commission, and the commercial banks. And the commercial banks, we should be really clear about it, have an obligation towards their depositors to protect their deposits. And they did not, and they are not doing so right now.
Yes, we will come back to the deposits, Dr. Nsouli. At the IIF address, you also focused on the negative impact of what you called the waiting game. What is the economic result of waiting this long to address the problems that had been festering, for decades, particularly waiting since late 2019 to address the crisis?
Look, this crisis should not have happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When Ambassador Issa approached me in late 2019, the crisis could have been totally prevented by taking some immediate measures. And the waiting game, or what I call the waiting game, is that there was absolutely no reaction to address the growing crisis. Now, This despite the pandemic and the port explosion. And there were several notable counterproductive measures taken in 2020 until today. One was the introduction of multiple exchange rates that fostered black markets and smuggling. It was not a question of just closing the borders. The multiple exchange rates were encouraging smuggling. Two, it was limiting withdrawals and imposing a variety of exchange rates on withdrawals that effectively implied haircuts on depositors. This contributed to loss of confidence. And then, to crown these achievements, the government defaulted on public debt, eroding further confidence. Yeah. The crisis was aggravated in almost an incredible manner. It is a concrete example of what we call at the IMF a disorderly adjustment. Real GDP dropped by an estimated 50% during the last 3 years. Inflation rose sharply, and we should not underestimate what has happened to inflation. Inflation rose, as measured by the Consumer Price Index, by 2,300% relative to 2019. I've never seen that happen in any country. The parallel market exchange rate rose from about 2,000 Lebanese pounds to the dollar at the end of 2019 to around 100,000 Lebanese pounds to the dollar at the end of February 2023, implying a loss in the value of the Lebanese pound of over 98%. It rendered the Lebanese pound virtually worthless. Now, on top of this, the mismanagement led to the loss of foreign exchange reserves at over $20 billion during the 3 years 2020, 2021, and 2022. This is more than Lebanon can expect in financial assistance over the next 3 years if reforms are undertaken. In fact, multiple of that. And Lebanon has suffered and continues to suffer from severe shortages of food, fuel, electricity, medicines, medical equipment, and basic necessities. And on top of all these, and this will have a lasting effect on Lebanon, the brain drain accelerated. Many qualified people have left the country to go and work overseas. And as I mentioned, the UN estimated that 80% of the population now falls under the poverty line. With all these, the world's confidence in Lebanon plummeted. This is the result of the waiting game of doing nothing and doing the wrong things.
Yes, a combination of both. We definitely need to gain back world confidence to ensure economic recovery, Dr. Nsouli, but certainly with the right reform measures, right? We will come back to those in a little while. I want to switch to Ambassador Issa for now. Ambassador Issa, you wrote an article in 2014 and called it the heist of the century. You basically anticipated the economic and financial meltdown we're experiencing today. Drawing from the Titanic analogy Dr. Nsouli used, what was that hidden part of the iceberg that had been grossly overlooked and mismanaged for decades?
Yes. I don't want to pretend to have predicted that the crisis would go to this extent, like Dr. Nsouli did. He had more insights into the financial situation of Lebanon. But I did see a very flawed policy, which he already talked about, and that is the policy of fixing the lira, pegging it to the dollar, while at the same time giving high interest rates. I mean, these two could be used separately at different times and for a short time and for good reasons. But But when you use them in tandem for such a long time, I see this as the part that's underwater of the iceberg that caused the crash.
Yes.
That dual policy, like the central bank had to intervene all the time to fix the lira at about $1,500, 1,500 lira per dollar for the longest time. Interest rates should go hand in hand with the risk of your investment. But here, what the central bank had done is they eliminated the risk, and they still gave very high and obnoxiously high interest rates the whole time, which basically I saw it as a flawed policy that was using the depositors' money to pad the pockets of the privileged, of the politicians and the ruling class and their circles.
Yes.
So yes, I wrote that, and in answer to your question, I think this was the essence and what led to today's crisis. Using this for over like 27 years.
Yeah, long time. What impact did these policies have on the deficit, Ambassador?
One has to look at numbers. In here, if we just look at two very important numbers in any budget, which are the revenues and the expenditures. I looked myself at it, and from 1993 till 2019, our revenues amounted total during those years to about $161 billion. At the same time, I looked at what we spent, and it was only $155 billion. We spent less than what we earned.
Yes.
Now, how did we, this is puzzling. Why did we have to borrow? Like today, or at the end of 2019, our national debt was around $90 billion. So when all along we should have had a surplus of about $6 billion. Okay, it's not a surplus, it's small, but still we didn't have a deficit. If we look at the current expenses and our capital investment, why did we have to borrow $90 billion? This, by looking at these two numbers, you understand there is something wrong in there.
Yes, definitely. Yes.
Now, if I want to go further and explain, I looked at the same time at how much our debt servicing total was during those same years. They amounted to $85 billion. So out of the $90 billion that is our national debt, $85 billion was paid in interest. And, this is referring back to the exorbitant high interest rates that we were paying. This kind of explain where the main problem that was in our fiscal budget, which was the interest payment.
Yes. And who benefited from all this, Ambassador Issa?
Well, who benefited? I would say everyone benefited to a different extent. Like small depositors who were seduced by high returns benefited, but in small amounts. But the ones who benefited the most were the people who were in the know, that they were reassured, I guess, that the interest rates will remain high while the exchange rate will remain fixed. So there is no risk for their investments, and they invested a lot of money, whether in deposited them in the banks and earned very high interest rates, or they bought the treasury bills that were also issued at very high interest rates. So I would say mostly the big investors, and among those are the commercial banks. Mm-hmm. They provided most of the high return loans to the central bank and to the government. I mean, they benefited so much that, like, during those years, the commercial banks expanded everywhere in Lebanon and also expanded regionally. Yet, after paying all of the costs of these expansion, you could see that they earned during those years $22 billion. They still earned $22 billion. So you would say that they were the biggest beneficiaries of that flawed policy.
Yes. What you just shared with us is truly shocking, Ambassador, and especially when we know that it could have been prevented. Dr. Nsouli, what can you tell us about people's deposits? Will they ever see them again? I mean, a major concern of depositors is that the government staff level agreement with the IMF imposes severe haircuts on deposits, and that's in addition to other concerns that are also hindering its implementation. Given your nearly 40-year IMF experience, Dr. Nsouli, working with countries in crisis, how do you assess the concerns being raised, and where does the staff level agreement stand today?
Let me address your question, which is a very important question. And let me address first the question on deposits. Yes, the deposits can and should be saved, but only under a meaningful reform program. They will not be saved under the current government program that starts from the premise of haircuts, making the depositors bear the burden of the government's and central bank and commercial bank losses. This is utterly unacceptable and will have very negative economic effects if implemented. Now, let me turn to the staff level agreement. The government reached a staff level agreement last year with the IMF. It includes many laudable objectives and many required reforms. But basically nothing has been done. It's at a complete standstill. The situation has deteriorated sharply since then. Just as an indication, the Lebanese pound was at 28,000 Lebanese pounds to the dollar when I was in Beirut last June. Today, it's at over or almost 100,000 Lebanese pounds to the dollar. So the situation has changed. Several aspects of the program, therefore, need to be updated, revisited, and modified to take into account these developments. Let me highlight a few things that really are very important. First, the audits. It will be essential to complete the rigorous audits of the central bank, the commercial banks, and the fiscal accounts, including the arrears of the government, to determine in a reliable manner the overall external financing gap. The figures that keep floating around, to me, are meaningless if we haven't completed the audits.
Yeah.
Second, the deposits. The deposits need to be safeguarded. We have to start from that premise. The strategy for restructuring the banking sector needs to be revised, considering the revised financial gap and the losses already suffered by the depositors. The revisions need to help restore confidence in the banking sector by avoiding additional haircuts to enable the banking system in the future to play its intermediary role and to prevent a further depression in demand that will undermine the recovery. Who will trust the banks if they all lose the money of their depositors? Dr. Samir Makdisi, the former Minister of Economy and the former President of the American University of Beirut, who is with us today, has written extensively about this. Also, the members of the Lebanese Economic Association have explained this in detail in interviews and in articles. The third issue is the capital controls, and this seems to be a very controversial issue today. The introduction of capital controls at this late stage in the crisis needs to be reassessed, as they will undermine confidence even more, lead to the emergence of a major black market for capital outflows, and hinder direct foreign exchange inflows and investment. Capital controls just don't work, and they hurt the recovery. And fourth, and finally, the exchange rate. The IMF called for the move to a single market determined rate. Let me clarify. This will not only require the unification of the multitude of exchange rates for all transactions, but also the return to a true floating market determined rate without capital restrictions. If we have capital restrictions, a parallel market will emerge and we cannot unify the exchange rate. Now, the widespread opposition to the government's program, including the recent additional proposed illusory deposit recovery fund, shows that there is no country ownership. This must be addressed in updating the program if it is to succeed.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nsouli. Your message about the deposits is loud and clear. Now, also during your address at the IIF, you provided a comprehensive set of reform measures needed to set the country on the road to recovery. You focused on three critical issues: financial reforms, structural reforms, and essential prerequisites. First of all, can you share with us the financial reforms that you would immediately launch?
Yes. Let me start off by saying that we need to start off with a solid database. We cannot just go ahead without knowing what's happening in the economy. And I want to repeat, we need to complete expeditiously the audits of the central bank, the commercial banks, and the fiscal accounts, including arrears. Without these audits, we have absolutely no foundation for a medium-term framework. And without this, we are essentially flying blind. Now, let me go to the 5 essential financial reforms. The exchange rate. There is no mystery. The exchange rate can be unified and floated immediately with no capital controls. Secondly, I think the time has come in Lebanon to undertake a currency reform involving the introduction of a new Lebanese pound. This would be similar to the successful German currency reform of 1948, implemented after the hyperinflation of World War II. And I would suggest that the new Lebanese pound be equal to 100,000 old Lebanese pounds. 3, we need to move expeditiously on the issue of debt. We need to restructure domestic and foreign debt. 4, liquidity. We have to provide liquidity in new Lebanese pounds by the central bank to commercial banks to meet withdrawals from Lebanese pounds and dollar deposits at the unified floating market exchange rate. And this is not the liquefaction of deposits, because at that point, if you have a floating exchange rate, you will be indifferent whether you get Lebanese pounds or you get dollars. You can just go to the market and exchange them at one exchange rate. And fifth, we have to adopt a 3-year budget that is consistent with debt sustainability. It has to involve civil service reform, optimizing the size of the civil service, and introducing wage adjustments to compensate for inflation. Now, we also need to prioritize expenditures to support infrastructure and social services. And we need to revise and modernize the tax system, including the use of the unified exchange rate. Right now, the budget uses, I don't know, all sorts of different exchange rates. And we need to streamline the procedures to prevent tax evasion and corruption. These would be the 5 essential financial reforms that are needed.
Yes, thank you for sharing them. And at the IIF, you also covered a wide range of structural reforms, Dr. Nsouli, that Lebanon needs to concurrently implement. What are they?
The 5 key structural reforms are the following. First, transparency. We need to introduce strong transparency and anti-corruption laws with solid enforcement mechanisms, as well as those ensuring the independence of the judiciary to start restoring confidence. The second structural reform would be the issue of prudential regulations. We need to strengthen prudential regulations and oversight at the level of the central bank, the Banking Supervision Commission, and the commercial banks to prevent another disaster from recurring.
Yeah.
3, we need to address the issue of government enterprises. These need to be audited, reviewed, and streamlined so that their operations of government-owned enterprises are sound and profitable. And in light of the audits, the government can also determine which to privatize and which to keep. And these can be overseen by an independent government agency reporting directly to the Prime Minister. The fourth issue is the issue of public utilities. Here we need to audit and launch a reform of public utilities, including the electricity sector, the water sector, and the port systems, with consideration to privatize and regulate such public utilities. And the fifth element is social protection, which is very important to me. We need to elaborate and institute a comprehensive social protection system.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Nsouli. But you hold that formulating a comprehensive financial and structural reform program is not sufficient, and that there are critical prerequisites to make it sufficient. What are these prerequisites?
Wow, this is the $100 million question, Dr. Lubna. Can Lebanon's economy and financial system be saved? Let us remember that the captain of the Titanic was warned repeatedly of the icebergs ahead.
Yes.
But he gave the order full steam ahead. And the fate and tragedy of the Titanic was sealed. That is the path on which Lebanon is headed today. We should not fool ourselves. There are 2 critical prerequisites for formulating and implementing effectively a comprehensive reform program in Lebanon at this stage. 1, we need to have a reformist president and a reformist cabinet. The election of a reformist president coupled with a reformist prime minister and a non-political cabinet of competencies that will focus on reforms is critical so that the cabinet can move forward without becoming the battleground for political issues. 2, you need to have unicity of command. Under the current system, the prime minister with the cabinet has the executive responsibility. but can be blocked in its functions by the president or the president of the parliament, or even one single minister. The former Renault Nissan chief executive officer, Carlos Rosen, recently explained that for reforms in Lebanon to succeed, it is essential to have unicity of command, as he had in his tenure at Renault Nissan. This can be achieved by granting the cabinet of competencies exceptional powers to undertake reforms over a specified period. It should not be open-ended. And even then, the task ahead will be enormous and should not be underestimated. The Lebanese polarizing divisions must stop. We are all Lebanese in the same ship, and we will all sink together if we let the ship sink. Or, as the saying goes, a house divided cannot stand. This is our country, and we should not destroy it.
Definitely not. I'm hoping those who have the power to make a difference, Dr. Nsouli, are hearing you today, and that they will take heed of your warnings. Thank you so much. Ambassador Issa, this is for you. Dr. Nsouli listed in his plan the main areas that are in dire need of reforming or even overhauling. We have been hearing for the last 3 years all kinds of blames and conflicting accounts of the losses in the electricity sector. Can you help us understand what is going on, and did it really add up to be 50% of our debt?
Not really, no. I mean, when our fiscal state is deplorable, nobody can deny that. And there are many areas that need to be fixed. But like you said, Dr. Hensuli mentioned 3 areas, which were the electricity, also the debt servicing cost, the interest payments that we have been making. And the third thing is our public sector, the size of our public sector. Now, to look at how much each of these sectors have contributed to our crisis, one has to be objective, not just throw numbers to place blame against political opponents, but rather do it in an objective way so that we know where we should focus our priorities and reforms. So yes, there has been losses in electricity, but they are nowhere close to 50%. A good way of looking at this is to look at each sector or each component in our fiscal budget and see how much we spent on it and what ratio that represented of the total expenditure. If we look at our total expenditure from 1993 to 2019, the year of the onset of the crisis, you could see we mentioned before we spent 155 billion. Now add on top of that, the 85 billion we spent in interest payments. That makes our total expenditure $240 billion. With that in mind, if we look at the 3 main factors that caused our deficit, perpetual deficit, you could see that the debt servicing during that period amounted to 85 over 240. That's about 35% of the total expenditure. Second is the public sector, which comes in almost the same, about 35%. This is before they adjusted the wages. Okay, after they adjusted the wages, it was a lot more. And third comes the electricity. The electricity, there was about $24 billion in remittances to cover the losses of the electricity. That is the total loss, and that only represents 10% of our total expenditure. Now, people try to make it 50% by considering it as a loan, that the state was giving loans and they slap on top of it an additional $26 billion to make it look like it's responsible. No, it's not. The real truth that the 24 billion in electricity losses are a lot of money, but they were due to state decisions not to increase the tariffs and the rate. Okay, so basically, and the state owns the utility, and it made the decision not to increase. So basically, they were subsidies, just like in any other sector. Like there are subsidies in the healthcare system that, or in the education system. So why in here in the electricity they want to slap an additional $26 billion in interest on top of the 24? It's politically motivated, and we shouldn't look at it. We should look at it in that way. We should look at it in an objective way. And yes, I'm not here defending EDL or the government for their mismanagement and letting the electricity sector deteriorate to the point that it is now. We have major losses, but they shouldn't be exaggerated to the point where we're blinded to the other factors in our fiscal deficit, which are number one, the interest payments, the debt servicing, and number two, the public sector. Now, to go into these, our public sector is oversized. We have, I think, about 325,000 current employees in the public sector and about 120,000 retirees on the payroll. And that, like we said, it represented 35% of the total expenditure. But in the last 2 years before the crisis, that rose to about 85% of our state revenues. This is not sustainable. There has been salary adjustments, maybe deservedly so, but it's not sustainable when your public sector was consuming 85% of your revenues. So this is as far as the public sector, it needs to be downsized considerably.
And how do we reform it? How do we reform, the electricity sector, Ambassador?
We have very old, inefficient, fuel-powered plants. This is the major problem. And there has been a plan to build new gas-powered plants for 10 years. But for political bickering and maybe for other reasons too, it keeps getting derailed. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to tell you that this is the only option available to Lebanon, is to build new gas-powered plants. Of course, there are nuclear and coal in the US, but these are not options for Lebanon.
Yes.
So if you just, with all its flaws, people criticize the plan that it has flaws, but regardless of its flaws, one has to look at numbers. Like EDL, the state-owned utility, had been producing electricity at a cost of 19 cents approximately per kilowatt hour. This is by using the fuel-powered power plants. While if we build gas-powered power plants, the cost internationally is known to be around maybe 6 cents per kilowatt hour. So there is right there there is a difference of 13 cents per kilowatt hour produced. Now the state or the EDL was producing at a cost of 19 cents, yet selling it to the citizens or the consumers at 10 cents. So this is where your losses are. But again, where is the reform needed? We have to implement the electricity plan to build a new gas-powered plants. That in itself will bring tremendous savings in itself, and it could turn the electricity utility from a losing liability on the state to maybe even a money-making enterprise. You see, Lebanon consumes about 25 billion kilowatt hours per year. Okay, at a difference, just that difference between running on fuel or on gas at 13 cents, you know, that in itself could save us about $3 billion a year. And this is, if we assume that the cost is 19 cents, even though nowadays our electricity is being provided mostly by private generators at a cost of 55 cents or 60 cents. So if we're saving $3 billion by a difference, when the difference is 13 cents, you can imagine. Now electricity is costing us maybe $12 billion extra per year. So I'd rather people, rather than saying what the state has given EDL, just look at the losses that are incurred right now by not implementing the electricity plan and building new gas-powered newer plants. Also, like, you know, I was reading a study not too long ago. It says, like now we're not even producing half the electricity that we need. So that study says that for every kilowatt hour that is needed, but not produced, generated, and put on the grid, the economy outside the electricity sector, the economy as a whole loses 70 cents per kilowatt hour. So you can imagine how much our economy has suffered, not just in direct losses in the electricity, but how much our economy has suffered for not building those gas-powered generation plants.
Yes, it's an unjustified way to make the sector more efficient, definitely, yes. Which led to this complete deterioration. Are you for privatizing utilities, Ambassador?
Well, I am in general, I am for privatizing, but for all utilities, not just that, but as long as it's done in the right way. You see, Lebanon has had some bad experiences with privatizing. You know, starting maybe from the tobacco industry way in the past, then, you know, to some small privatization in the electricity field and like smaller smaller areas. And not recently, but in the last 30 years, we had, we tried to privatize the cellular sector. And it was done in a bad way. Like, it had some flaws. Like if you look at the cellular, there were 2 licenses issued, but they were issued to politically privileged, let's call them, politically privileged individuals. And there was no compensation, there was no upfront compensation for the state's exclusive rights or any meaningful revenue sharing in the future. So that was one flaw. They were basically what you could call political gifts.
Yeah.
Second, when you privatize, you have to open it up to competition. They privatized, but practically maintained the monopoly. They didn't open it up to competition. And third, there was no serious regulation to protect the consumer from high rates and higher. So all of these flaws led to a very poor service. When they first privatized the cellular phone, they led to very poor service and a very high cost to consumers, which prompted the state to repossess those 2 cellular networks and hire operators for the state to operate the network. Now, they didn't do a great job, but still, with less than adequate reforms and management for the state, they were able to expand the networks and to lower the cost somewhat, and still turn these 2 networks into more or less of a cash cow for the state. They were making $1 to $2 billion a year for a long time, of course, before the crisis. So to answer you, yes, I am for privatization, but when it's done properly, opened up to competition with transparent bids, and also after we revamp like the electricity, it needs to be overhauled before we privatize it. So at least it's not sold for pennies, to realize the real valuation of the utility before it's privatized.
Yes, so reform, then privatize and sell it for what it's worth.
Right.
Ambassador, let's discuss the issue of water. Most areas in Lebanon are suffering from a shortage of water, while billions of cubic meters of water from our rivers flow into the sea unutilized. How can we remedy that?
Well, it's true. The World Bank warned that the greater Beirut area could go thirsty in a couple to few years. Unfortunately, there has been a plan to build dams in various areas of Lebanon, and this plan has existed, for tens of years, and it was revived in the last 10 years. The last of which was the dam, the Bisri Dam, which is supposed to provide water for the greater Beirut area, plus some areas in Mount Lebanon, probably serving over 1.5 million people. Now, unfortunately, that plan was stopped midway. After being reviewed, it was approved and financed by the World Bank. but for whatever reason, it will stop midway, and eventually it will cause Beirut to go thirsty. Now, like you said, we have a treasure or a fortune, whatever, like in a critical resource. We have between 2 to 4 billion cubic meters per year of surface water, river water, just flowing into the sea, mostly unutilized. So we're wasting it.
Yeah.
Like if you just want to get an idea about how much we're wasting or not utilizing, nowadays the price per cubic meter in Lebanon is about $3 per cubic meter. So just looking at those 2 to 4 billion, you could say we're wasting anywhere between 6 to 12 billion dollars by letting our water run into the sea unutilized. And mind you, the World Bank estimates that these $3 per cubic meter will rise to about $20 per cubic meter.
Yes.
So this should give you an idea. The 6 to 12 that we're wasting, how much it would be 6 times more. So yes, we are unfortunately not doing, and the solution is to go back and build those dams.
Yes. So 2 to 4 billion cubic meters of surface water per year are being wasted in the heart of the Middle East, which is mostly arid. Yeah. That's preposterous. Right. We want to shift gears a little bit here, Ambassador Issa, and talk about the trade here. And you know, we exported in 2021, our product export was at $4.79 billion, while our imports were at $16.3 billion. We imported 77% of our goods in 2021. How can we reverse this trend on trade? And do we need better international relations to improve our international trade?
Yes, definitely. But we need more than that. I mean, definitely, like if you look at international relations, our exports to the Gulf they have been affected tremendously, but for political reasons, but also because of the Syrian crisis. Mm-hmm. You know, our only route out, other than through the sea, which turned out to be very expensive. It was our only route out to the Gulf areas. So yes, we need better international relations. But also one cannot overlook the effect of our own policies, which is fixing the exchange rate, how much effect it had, how much impact it had on our productive sectors, like the industry, like agriculture, tourism. It made everything expensive, all Lebanese products expensive. So that affected a lot.
Yes.
And you know, in turn, once these productive sectors get impacted, of course, it impacts your trade balance with the world. We are now importing a lot more, like you said, than we should be, and mm-hmm. exporting a lot less when mm-hmm. our currency was artificially kept high. Yeah. And you know, we also have a big deficit in our like a negative current account that has to be dealt with. And for I don't know, especially during the crisis, but before that, you know, it has been offset mostly by remittances from our diaspora. And here I want to, this has been the savior for the Lebanese economy, the remittances that we get from the diaspora. And here I want to, truly thank the diaspora for all what they do in supporting Lebanon, especially after the crisis has started. And they had, I would say, they have been the miracle that kept Lebanon going during this time. But this we shouldn't neglect the reforms that we need to do inside Lebanon. Counting on the diaspora is not efficient. We should do our own reforms.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for sharing that with us, Ambassador. Ambassador Issa, I want to talk about the refugees, the Syrian refugees in Lebanon. There are over 2 million Syrian refugees today. What is the direct effect of hosting this many of them?
Well, it has been catastrophic on our economy. First, let me start by saying we have voluntarily fulfilled all our humanitarian duties. And we did a lot more than our share. We actually, we did so much that what we did is unmatched by any other country in helping in the Syrian refugee crisis. Let me state some data that I saw in a recent study. Like the number of refugees has exceeded 2 million lately. Some were there, but there are a lot of newborn that are adding to the numbers in Lebanon. So it has exceeded 2 million. And out of these 2 million, many of them had gone back and forth between Lebanon and Syria. And they continue to do so now. Like you see many families just go and spend the holidays in Syria and then come back to work in Lebanon. So we have to say that this category does not qualify as refugees. Okay, these are truly they are economic migrants. Another thing I want to point out: over the years, UNHCR had asked for a budget of $2.8 billion as their anticipated cost per year, just for direct hosting costs. That means basic services and maybe, I don't know what else they call hosting, maybe tents or even subsidies and rentals. Okay, so they asked for 2.8, but they have only been getting about $1.2 billion a year in their budget. So there is right there what the UNHCR estimates it will cost to host these refugees in Lebanon, and what they're getting in contributions and what they are themselves contributing to the refugees in Lebanon is 1.2 billion. So there is a gap of 1.6 billion. Now, if you look at this over the last 12 years that the Syrian crisis has been going on, you end up with about $20 billion just in what they asked for or what they say it should cost and what they're aiding with. Now, of course, this $20 billion is being paid by the Lebanese. Mm-hmm. Maybe not by the state directly, but by the Lebanese. Yeah. Also, there has been, this is without talking about the other indirect costs that Lebanon has suffered from the Syrian refugee crisis, such as unpaid electricity bills, additional damage to our environment, impact and costs on the transportation and education and healthcare sectors. They benefited from government subsidies that were intended to the Lebanese in food and fuel and this. So there is a cost on that too. Also, they're adding cost to our security and jail systems. Mm-hmm. So many studies, there are many studies, and like I said, there is one recent local study, but they all concur that the indirect costs are more than the direct costs. They amount to about the indirect costs on our whole economy and infrastructure. They amount to about $30 billion, mm-hmm. give or take. I mean, but yeah. So if you add that to the $20 billion in direct cost and direct budget gap, you're talking about close to $50 billion that Lebanon has suffered from all of this.
Yes. How is such a loss sustainable?
Well, it is not. It is not, honestly. $50 billion represented about 1 full year of our GDP before the crisis. Like, if in perspective, this would be, I'm used to talking to US officials. I would put it in perspective to them. This would be comparable to the US suffering a $23 trillion loss.
Yes.
Okay, and then, but this is even before the crisis. After the crisis, our GDP crashed to almost, I think, 21 billion. So that $50 billion would represent 2.5 times our GDP, or in US terms, it would be like $57 trillion. I don't know any country who can, the largest and greatest country in the world, US or any other developed country, I don't know how they can't even sustain such unimaginable losses. Definitely. But unfortunately, they keep insisting that we do, that we accept the loss and we sustain it ourselves.
Completely unfair. Now, there has been lately an uptick in tension and threats of violence against Syrian refugees. What do you say to that, Ambassador?
Well, true, but we should caution against resorting to violence to force the refugees to return. We are the victim now. By doing so, we have to be very careful. We will lose the moral edge that we have in this issue. Mm-hmm. And we would turn ourselves from victims to victimizers, yes. At least in the world, in the eye of the international community. So, no, definitely, no one should resort to violence. I mean, we need to swiftly resolve this issue, but in the meantime, we have to uphold the dignity of the refugees and the displaced, and adhere to humanitarian principles at the same time.
And what is the best course of action at this point?
Well, we have to keep lobbying and pressuring the international authorities and our local ones to implement the laws. There are laws that govern these things, and they are being overlooked, whether locally inside or internationally. So we have to keep pushing both local and international to implement the laws, and also to take measures that at least will enable us and help us to implement the laws. Such measures like carrying out a comprehensive census and counting of the refugees. And we should insist that the international organizations hand over the data that they have and that they have been refusing to turn over. This way, at least we can start classifying who among those refugees truly qualify as a refugee, and who is here just for economic reasons, like they are economic migrants. We also, anyone who doesn't qualify, we have to demand that they should return to Syria. And while they return in Syria, the international community needs to be giving them aid in Syria, just to dissuade them and not give them an excuse to return back to Lebanon. We also, if we find that some do qualify as refugees, and until they can go back, they can stay in Lebanon. But in the meantime, we should demand a much greater compensation to Lebanon to cover not just the hosting, but we talked about that $50 billion in losses to our economy. So those who end up staying temporarily until they can return safely, then Lebanon should be compensated a lot more than they have been.
Yeah. Thank you, Ambassador. Briefly, Ambassador, I want to take you to the southern border and talk about the historic maritime border agreement. What does it have to promise as far as energy resources, internal political stability, and peace with neighbors are concerned?
Yeah, we've been giving all bad news so far. But, on the positive side, yes, we have been in indirect negotiations with Israel through the mediation of the US for 10 years. And there wasn't much movement till the last year when we reached an agreement that allows Lebanon to finally embark on its exploration of the waters, of the resources in the waters, and gas and oil. Now, the agreement, I'm sure you heard, faced loud opposition by some, while on the other extreme, others were touting it as like the lifeline to our economy, and also that it will present a windfall to us now and to our future generations. Well, the truth is, reality is neither that nor that. It's not, we didn't sell out our, as we were accused, we didn't sell out our rights. And also, it's not going to be like the miracle that's going to save Lebanon from all everything. It's a good agreement that preserved Lebanon's borders and exploration rights, and it will provide a good, or I would say a solid base to our economy to build on. But we shouldn't tout it as the miracle or the windfall that some have been doing, because I think it will deter us, or it will make us neglect doing the reforms that are needed to in our economy.
Yes.
And without these reforms, that newfound windfall will not make a dent in fixing our economy.
Yes.
Overall, like, Lebanon is projected, like the reserves for Lebanon, unproven reserves, are projected to be between 12 to 25 trillion cubic feet of gas and about 600 to 700 million barrels of oil. Like in a good scenario, the value of those could amount to about 200 billion. And one can assume the share of the state, Lebanon, from it would be about half of that, so 100 billion. So, but that's 100 billion total that will be explored over the next 30 years. So that presents about a little more than 3 billion. We can expect about 3 billion if all goes according to plan.
Yes.
3 billion that will be added to our economy.
Yeah.
So it is a great base for our economy, but definitely not what people were saying. I heard people talking about trillions of dollars, and it is not. Now,
Okay.
however, it's a very good agreement, but the bigger value for our economy, it's very good. The bigger value, though, of the agreement, and it's not mentioned much, it lies in the security and stability that it will provide on our troubled southern borders.
Yes.
And hopefully this will eventually lead to real peace.
Okay. Thank you, Ambassador Issa, for sharing all this information with us. I would like to ask Dr. Nsouli. Dr. Nsouli, if you could unmute yourself, please. How long do you think, Dr. Nsouli, it would take a reformist president and an independent cabinet of competencies that are well aligned on the path to recovery to start turning things around? How long do you think it would take?
Thank you, Dr. Lubna. I think it would take something like 6 months, but we could see immediate positive effects in less than 1 month. Many of the corrective measures, like for instance, floating and unifying the exchange rate, can be implemented in 1 day.
That's amazing news, Dr. Nsouli. What have we been waiting for? Ambassador, Ambassador Issa, can you weigh in?
Yes, I mean, I can't top that. He said it all, but again, like he said, many of the reforms he's urging the government to make, they don't need any upfront money, and they don't need a lot of extraneous work. They just need swift decision making and a genuine will to reform.
Yes.
So it could be very fast. Let me add here, with all the bad news we gave, but there is always some silver lining to many things. Like in the 3 areas that we talked about, we can find the silver lining in the devaluation of the lira. Theoretically, our exports should increase, our imports decrease. Also, the public sector, unfortunately, it's starting to shrink because of attrition and bad salaries. If you look at electricity, by necessity, people are installing more and more solar alternatives.
Yes.
And the biggest of all, like our debt, 2/3 of it was in lira, which I think was about $60 billion in lira out of the 90. Now that 60 billion in debt has vanished. Theoretically, it's worth less than 1 billion now. So yes,
pretty quickly.
It should be, but I leave that to Dr. Nsouli. He has better knowledge in that area than I do.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now, I want to go back to Dr. Nsouli. Dr. Nsouli, we have had a long and comprehensive discussion today. What are the key issues that you see for the path forward to save Lebanon, or as you characterize, to avoid the fate of the Titanic? Can we all go over those pretty quickly?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Lubna.
Yes.
Let's just focus on 7 issues that are of critical importance.
Yes.
First, confidence. We need to regain the confidence of the international community. To do so, Lebanon needs to demonstrate that it's helping itself so that the international community can help it. This is something I have heard from congressmen here, from the State Department here, from my French friends, from my Saudi friends. It's all over. They keep saying Lebanon has to help itself so that we can help it. We have to stop waiting for other countries to come to the rescue of Lebanon. We have to start doing things. Second, there should be an urgency in undertaking comprehensive reforms, and this cannot be overstressed. We cannot just sit around and wait. Third, the issue of deposits. Bank deposits should be safeguarded in full. Capital controls should not be imposed, and the exchange rate should be unified and floated, but supported by comprehensive financial and structural measures to ensure a rapid recovery. Fifth, governance. Let's look at governance reforms, including the adoption of effective anti-corruption laws and ensuring an independent and well-functioning judiciary system. These are paramount. Then ownership. The reform program should be announced publicly and transparently with an information campaign focusing on generating broad-based support and true public ownership of the reform program if it is to succeed. Now, on the IMF and the World Bank, I would say that the magnitude and multiplicity of the challenges facing Lebanon require close collaboration with the IMF, the World Bank, and other specialized UN agencies, not only for using their expertise, but also for catalyzing assistance to Lebanon. And finally, waiting. The continuation of the waiting game or of inaction and political divisions will only ensure that Lebanon, like the Titanic, will crash into the iceberg as economic and social conditions deteriorate to the point that provokes civil strife with unimaginable results. In my view, it's high time for all Lebanese to unite and act to save our dear country. Thank you, Dr. Lubna.
Thank you so much. I echo your sentiments, Dr. Nsouli. It's definitely high time. Thank you. Let's go straight to the questions from the audience, shall we? Let me read a question here from the chat box. We have one from Farid Makarim saying, thank you, Dr. Nsouli and Ambassador Issa for your explanations. How do you judge those people in power who did nothing and just waited when the cow was falling down, apart from drinking its milk and eating its flesh? Are they human or are they butchers? And who dares to question them and serve them justice?
I don't know if Ambassador Issa wants to answer that. I am basically an economist. But let me say this. This is a shared responsibility. I think the divisions in Lebanon are behind the problems we have in the waiting game. And I think everyone is responsible because if we don't unite, we cannot solve the problems of the country.
Yes. Yes, thank you. We have one from Rabia Sukkariya saying, thank you both so much for the sincere efforts. Our hearts literally cry for the suffering of our beloved Lebanon. The question is not to cancel the horrible corruption in our government, but there are many really good people who are trying their best. Talking as if Lebanon is an independent entity surprises me. Do you think any of this is independent from Israel not being bowed to? Foreign policy?
Sorry, I didn't get the last.
Do you think foreign policy
part
has something to do with the predicament we're in today?
Well, I'm sure, but not like they say that it's a conspiracy. You know, we are affected. We live in an area that is that has always affected Lebanon, but unlike what I hear, that it's everybody thinks it's a conspiracy against Lebanon. I doubt it is. Not that anyone can tell you one way or the other, but personally, I doubt that it is. And I put the blame mostly on ourselves, on
Yes.
our policies inside Lebanon.
Okay, thank you. You're unmuted. Go ahead, Princess Hayat. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. It's really very, very interesting. But you know, all the problems that were now listed, and they are actual and very dangerous problems, but I can see that the vital and opening the doors to lose our country is talking about the settlements of the Syrian refugees in Lebanon. 2 months ago, the United Nations, the UNHCR, demanded from the government to give permanent residences to the Syrian refugees. And this is not innocent at all. And we went and we talked to the UN, and their answers, we asked for clarification, and their answers were not convincing at all. And then after that, they asked for the government to pay in fresh dollars, not in Lebanese pounds. This is also another attraction for the Syrians to stay in Lebanon. Most of the Syrians, they say, we want to go to our country, and this is their right. And you must help them to go back with dignity, not to keep them in our country, because the Europeans are afraid that the Syrians will flood to their countries in Europe. The Americans, I'm sorry to say, they are waiting to see what kind of a bargain it will be between the Assad and them, and I don't know what. The burden is on our shoulders, and we are really threatened by losing our country. My question to you and to all this distinguished group, can you help in addressing the United Nations, the American government, and the European Union, asking them to help us stay independent and to keep our country as Lebanese and for the Lebanese? Lebanon is for the Lebanese.
Yes.
Can I ask you to help in this issue?
Yes. Okay. Anybody, Ambassador Dr. Nsouli, anybody could answer that?
Yeah.
Briefly?
Well, I agree with most of what she has said, but you know, the many in the Lebanese government, you know, have been trying and lobbying for the same. But what people have to understand, that we are also subjected to a lot of pressure, and the international community hasn't been very helpful on that end. You know, they donate money, but there has been a lot of pressure on the Lebanese authorities not to return the refugees back to Syria. On that end, when you say a plot, I say yes. And that issue, it is like we've received threats, we've received all kinds of pressure, so that we don't do anything about returning them. So a lot of officials, especially in our foreign ministry and our embassies, keep lobbying against that. I spent 3-4 3-4 years in Washington, having a conference about that almost monthly. But we have to keep fighting. The only thing I will caution again and disagree with is the calls for violence that have been hearing lately.
Yes.
So we have to be careful about that.
Yes. We have a question from Dr. Nicolas Shikhani. Go ahead, unmute yourself, please, and make it quick. Thank you.
First, I would like to thank Dr. Hensuli for this amazing and extensive presentation to solve the economic crisis. This is amazing, and I agree with you. In one day, things can turn over. And thank you, Ambassador Issa, because your view and your vision, business and politics, are really amazing. I would like to add one thing that Amira Arslan has said earlier. The problem we are having, the same that Ambassador Issa saw the deal with Israel as not about money, but about security, which I like very much the approach. I would see the deal in not getting out in humanity and Bikarami, the Syrian from Lebanon, is not a financial problem. It's an existence problem for Lebanon. So today, it's not about $50 billion that we are missing. In 3 to 5 years, we will miss our country. And this is very, very dangerous. The natality rate is 1 to 7. Okay, in 5 years, they will not be 50% of the Lebanese, but 80 or 90. And I would add, it will be a natural extension for the Syrian government to come and protect their people in Lebanon, the way the Russians are protecting their people in Ukraine. And this is the main danger. And I would like to have your opinion about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone?
Well, yeah, I agree with Mr. Shikhani. We need to keep fighting and working on this thing. And also, I understand that he calls it an existential issue more than money. It's both. It's both, because you know, the losses that we are suffering are making our own citizens leave. So if we have our own citizens leave, and the international community is making it beneficial and profitable for the Syrians to come in, so that's existential too. Now, hopefully, with the new things going on in the Middle East, the new agreement and rapprochement that has happened, like Princess Arslan has said, hopefully it's one of the conditions that they're putting on Syria, that it takes back or have a plan to take back the refugees. But what's more important, one of the main impediments has been like the money for reconstruction to go. So hopefully the Gulf states who are putting that condition on the Syrian government will also be willing to provide some of the money for reconstruction, so that they can go back to in a safe and dignified way. And this is the excuse, or what the international community keeps saying, that they should go back in a dignified and safe way.
Yes, thank you, Ambassador. One last thing I want to add here is a comment left by Dr. Munir Rashid, the president of Lebanese Economic Association, saying what does it take maybe to make a government adopt the proposal by Dr. Nsouli? Or maybe it's not a question, it's just a observation. Thank you so much,
Okay.
everyone. Thank you. Thank you. This will bring us to the end of the meeting. I know there are so many other topics we could have discussed, but we don't have enough time to do that. Ambassador Issa and Dr. Nsouli, thank you for your patience and for taking all these questions. Your devotion for Lebanon is evident, and we are desperate for your unrelenting efforts to put us on the right track finally. So many in Lebanon today are feeling hopeless, helpless, and betrayed, and it breaks my heart. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us. Today's event will be uploaded to my YouTube channel where you can watch it and share it openly. We will have it subtitled in Arabic. And I would like to end with a quote from Mahatma Gandhi when he said, and I quote, "When I despair, I remember that all through history, the way of truth and love have always won. There have been tyrants and murderers, and for a time they can seem invincible, but in the end, they always fall. Think of it, always," unquote. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Lubna. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.